I watched through the crack in my bedroom door as Emma rifled through my closet, her manicured nails catching on empty hangers that swung uselessly in the void. The confusion on her face was exquisite. Mouth slightly open, perfectly threaded eyebrows drawn together in that way that meant she was about to throw a tantrum. She was looking for my vintage Chanel cardigan, the cream one with the pearl buttons that she'd coveted since the day I brought it home from Paris. The one she'd stolen from me in my previous life, wearing it to her engagement party while I sat at home in my threadbare pajamas, uninvited to my own sister's celebration. But this time, the closet was empty. Completely gloriously empty. "Where the hell is everything?" Emma's screech carried through our family's sprawling Connecticut estate, her voice shrill enough to shatter the carefully maintained veneer of upper-class civility our mother so desperately clung to. I smiled, sipping my coffee, Colombian single origin, the expensive kind mother always said was wasted on me, and let her discover the truth on her own. Every single item, from my extensive collection of designer pieces to my casual wear, had been donated to women's shelters across the state 3 weeks ago. The tax deduction alone was substantial, but the look on Emma's face when she finally figured it out, that would be priceless. Because I died once before, you see. Died at 28 in a car accident that wasn't really an accident at all. And when I opened my eyes again, I was 18, standing in my childhood bedroom with a decade of memories that hadn't happened yet, but would, if I let them. This time, I wouldn't be so stupid. The abuse had started small, as it always does in families like ours, where appearances matter more than truth. I was 5 when I first understood that something was fundamentally wrong with how my parents treated me compared to Emma, who was 2 years younger and had been born with my mother's blonde hair and blue eyes instead of my father's dark coloring. My mother, Patricia Whitmore Sterling, came from old money, the kind that built museums and had buildings at Yale named after them. My father, James Sterling, had married into it, a self-made tech entrepreneur who'd sold his first company for $30 million, but would never quite be one of us in my mother's family's eyes. I looked like my father. Emma looked like my mother. And in Patricia Whitmore Sterling's world, that made all the difference. "Mother!" Emma's voice grew more hysterical. "Mother, come here right now!" I heard my mother's heels clicking up the marble staircase. Louboutins, naturally. The ones with the red soles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I counted the seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. "What is it, darling? I'm supposed to meet the event planner in 20 minutes for your engagement party." Look at this." Emma's voice cracked with genuine distress. "Victoria's entire closet is empty. Everything is gone." The silence that followed was delicious. I could picture my mother's face, that careful mask of Botoxed serenity cracking just slightly. In my previous life, I'd never stood up to them. I'd let Emma take my clothes, my jewelry, my opportunities. I'd let my mother gaslight me into believing I was selfish for wanting anything for myself. I'd let my father ignore me in favor of his real daughter, the one who looked like she belonged in family photos. I'd let them steal everything from me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a shell of a woman who worked herself to death in a junior position at her father's company, while Emma lived off a trust fund and my parents' endless generosity. Not this time. "Victoria!" My mother's voice held that dangerous edge, the one that used to make me cower and apologize. "Come here this instant." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate slowness, smoothed down my simple black dress, purchased new just yesterday after the closet purge, and made my way to what used to be my bedroom. They'd given me the smallest room in the house, despite the estate having 12 bedrooms. Emma's suite was 3 times the size, with an attached bathroom that had heated floors and a rainfall shower. Mine had a bathroom the size of a closet, with a shower that only produced lukewarm water on good days. But I wouldn't be living here much longer anyway. "Yes, Mother?" I kept my voice light, innocent, as I stepped into the doorway. Emma stood in the center of my empty closet, looking like a child who'd just been told Christmas was canceled. My mother's face was flushed an unbecoming shade of red that clashed with her rose gold highlights. "Where are your clothes?" Mother demanded. "What have you done?" "I donated them," I said simply, "to various women's shelters in Connecticut and New York. The Good Shepherd home in Hartford, Sarah's house in Bridgeport, Interval House in Greenwich. Should I continue? I have the receipts if you'd like to see them. The tax deduction is going to be substantial." Emma's mouth fell open. You? You donated my Chanel cardigan? The one I was going to wear to my engagement party? Your cardigan? I tilted my head, letting confusion color my voice. I don't recall giving you any of my clothing, Emma. Did you perhaps misplace something of your own? You know what I mean. Emma stamped her foot, actually stamped it like a toddler throwing a tantrum. At 26 years old, or would be in a few months, she still hadn't learned to control herself. I was going to borrow it. Without asking, you mean, I corrected gently. The way you've borrowed my things for the past 10 years without returning them? I found that interesting, actually. When I did an inventory of my closet before the donation, I realized I was missing over $40,000 worth of clothing and accessories. Pieces that mysteriously disappeared and then showed up in your Instagram photos. The color drained from Emma's face. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. How dare you, Mother hissed. How dare you embarrass your sister like this before her engagement party? Do you have any idea how much work has gone into planning this event? The Vanderbilts are coming, Victoria. The Vanderbilts. And you've just donated the dress I was going to lend Emma? Lend her from my closet? I raised an eyebrow, and that's an interesting choice of words, Mother. Unless you'd been planning to steal it from me without permission. Again. I'd never spoken to them like this before. In my previous life, I'd been meek, accommodating, desperate for scraps of their approval. I'd let them walk all over me because some broken part of me had believed that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, convenient enough, they might love me. But I'd lived an entire life already. I'd died alone in a hospital room after the accident that everyone knew wasn't an accident, with no family at my bedside because Emma's wedding shower was the same day and Mother couldn't possibly miss that. I'd spent my last moments on Earth looking at a phone that never rang, waiting for a father who never came, mourning a life I'd wasted, trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I wasn't that person anymore. You've become very bold suddenly. My father's voice cut through the tension as he appeared in the hallway behind me. James Sterling, in his casual weekend wear, custom-tailored slacks, and a cashmere sweater that cost more than his first car. He'd been handsome once before the years of corporate stress and maintaining my mother's lifestyle had etched lines into his face. Would you care to explain yourself, Victoria? In my previous life, my father's disappointment had been a physical weight, crushing and inescapable. He'd never hit me. The Sterlings didn't do something so crass. But his indifference had been worse than any blow. He'd built a tech empire, revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure, and sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. But he'd never once come to any of my school events, never once asked about my day, never once treated me like I was his daughter instead of an unfortunate obligation. Emma got the family legacy. I got the scraps. I'm happy to explain, Father, I said, turning to face him with a calm I didn't feel. My heart was racing, but my voice remained steady. I've decided to simplify my life. I read an article about how minimalism and charitable giving can lead to greater personal fulfillment, so I donated my excess clothing to those who need it more than I do. Excess? Emma shrieked. You donated everything. Yes, I agreed, like everything I wasn't currently wearing or didn't immediately need. I'll rebuild my wardrobe slowly with pieces I actually choose for myself, rather than accepting Mother's hand-me-downs from boutiques Emma doesn't like. That hit home. My mother flinched almost imperceptibly because it was true. Most of my nice clothes had been Emma's rejects, things that didn't fit her quite right or weren't trendy enough. My mother would present them to me like gifts, and I'd been expected to be grateful. This is about your sister's engagement, isn't it? Father's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet that used to terrify me. You're jealous that Emma is marrying Christopher Hartford, and you're acting out like a child. Christopher Hartford III, heir to the Hartford Hotel fortune, devastatingly handsome, and a serial cheater who would give Emma chlamydia twice during their 3-year marriage before finally leaving her for his 22-year-old personal trainer. In my previous life, I'd watched Emma's perfect marriage crumble from the outside, never knowing the full extent of Christopher's infidelities, until Emma drunkenly confessed everything to me at 2 a.m. on a random Tuesday, crying into her third bottle of wine. But that was the future. Right now, Emma thought she'd won the lottery, and Christopher was still maintaining his facade of wealthy, eligible bachelor ready to settle down. I'm not jealous at all, I said honestly. I hope Emma and Christopher are very happy together. I simply decided that material possessions were weighing me down and I wanted to start fresh. You had no right. Mother started, but I interrupted her. Actually, I had every right. Those were my possessions, purchased with my own money from my job at Sterling Tech. I looked directly at my father as I said it. The job I earned through a competitive application process, despite your attempts to discourage me from applying to your own company. My father's jaw tightened. He hated being reminded that I worked at Sterling Tech, his company, in the data analysis department. In my previous life, I'd languished there for a decade, passed over for promotion after promotion while less qualified candidates advanced past me. I'd thought it was because I wasn't good enough. I'd learned later, through a conversation I'd overheard at my own funeral, that my father had explicitly told HR never to promote me above entry level, said it would look like nepotism. Nepotism was fine for Emma, of course, who sat on the board of the family foundation despite having no qualifications beyond her last name and never attended a single meeting. But for me, the daughter who actually worked, that would be inappropriate. This conversation is over, Father declared, using the voice he reserved for ending conference calls. You will apologize to your sister and your mother, and you will take Emma shopping this afternoon to replace the cardigan she needed for her party. No, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a grenade. No one moved. No one breathed. What did you say? Father's voice was soft, dangerous. I said no. I met his eyes directly, something I'd never had the courage to do in my previous life. I won't apologize for donating my own property. I won't take Emma shopping to replace something that was never hers to begin with. And I won't be attending the engagement party. Victoria Adelaide Sterling, Mother's voice rose to a pitch only dogs could hear. I'll be moving out at the end of the month, I continued as if she hadn't spoken. I've already put a deposit down on an apartment in Manhattan near my work. I think it's time I established my independence. That was a lie. I wouldn't be moving to Manhattan. But they didn't need to know that yet. Emma burst into tears, real ones this time, not the calculated kind she used to manipulate our parents. You're ruining everything. You've always been jealous of me, always trying to make me look bad. Mother, make her stop. But I was already walking away back to my room where I had work to do. Real work. The kind that would change everything. Because this was just the beginning. The history of my abuse at the hands of my family was long and intricate, woven through with 1,000 small cruelties that had culminated in my death. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the memories that had returned with crystalline clarity the moment I opened my eyes at 18 years old. I was 5 when I first understood that I was different from Emma. We were at a family gathering, some tedious charity gala that Mother's side of the family hosted annually. Emma, only 3 years old, had spilled red wine on her white dress. She'd been reaching for a glass on the table, knocked it over, and the crimson liquid had spread across the tablecloth and down her front like blood. I'd done the same thing 2 months earlier. Mother had dragged me out of the event by my arm, leaving bruises that lasted for a week. She'd screamed at me in the car all the way home about how embarrassing I was, how I could never do anything right, how she was ashamed to call me her daughter. When Emma spilled the wine, Mother had laughed, called it adorable, told everyone that Emma was just so eager to be grown up that she wanted to try the wine. The host had brought out a new dress for Emma, designer, expensive, and everyone had cooed over how cute she looked. I remember standing there in my itchy party dress, watching this unfold, and understanding with the clarity that sometimes comes to children that the rules were different for me. I just didn't understand why yet. The why became clear as I got older. My mother, Patricia Whitmore, had never wanted to marry my father. She'd been in love with someone else. Bradley Morrison, a man from her own social circle, someone appropriate. but Bradley had been in love with Patricia's best friend, Catherine. And when they'd gotten engaged, Patricia had spiraled. She'd had a fling with my father, gotten pregnant, and been forced by her family to marry him to avoid scandal. She'd never forgiven him for it. And by extension, she'd never forgiven me for existing. I learned this when I was 12, listening outside my parents' bedroom door during one of their infamous fights. My mother had been drinking. She always drank more when Bradley and Catherine visited, which they did often because they were still in Mother's social circle. "Every time I look at her, I see you," Mother had hissed. "I see the mistake I made, the life I could have had if you hadn't trapped me." "I didn't trap you," Father had responded wearily. "You made your choice." "What choice? What choice did I have? My family would have disowned me." "Then perhaps you should have been more careful." The sound of something shattering, a glass probably, had sent me scurrying back to my room. But I'd understood then. I was the physical embodiment of my mother's biggest regret, and my father, who'd only married her for her family's money and connections, resented having a daughter who looked like him in a family where appearance was everything. Emma, born 2 years later, had been the golden child from the moment she emerged with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was the daughter my mother could love, the one who looked like she belonged in the Whitmore family portraits, the one my father could parade around without being reminded of his working-class origins. The favoritism had been blatant and unapologetic. Emma got a new car for her 16th birthday, a BMW convertible. I got a bus pass. Emma went to private school in Switzerland for a year. I was told we couldn't afford to send both of us, despite the fact that my college fund alone could have paid for it. Emma's room was redecorated every 2 years. Mine still had the same furniture from when I was 7. But the cruelty wasn't just in the gifts and opportunities denied. It was in the daily, grinding erosion of my self-worth. When I made the honor roll every semester, my parents didn't attend the ceremonies. When Emma got a B- in a class, they threw her a party. When I wanted to join the debate team, Mother told me I didn't have the personality for it. When Emma wanted to try cheerleading, they hired a private coach. I worked 2 jobs through high school to save money for college. My parents paid for Emma's entire undergraduate education at Vassar, including her apartment in New York and a generous monthly allowance. The worst part was that no one outside our family saw it. To everyone else, we were the perfect Sterling family, successful, charitable, photogenic. My parents were skilled at maintaining appearances. In public, they were cordial to me. Never warm, but never obviously cruel. And I'd been so well trained to play my part that I'd never contradicted the narrative. The physical abuse had been rare but memorable. Mother had slapped me 3 times in my life, once for talking back when I was 7, once for embarrassing her at a charity luncheon when I was 14 by discussing her drinking with her friends. I'd thought they knew, they hadn't. And once for refusing to give Emma my college acceptance letter to Harvard so she could see what one looked like before her own applications. I'd gotten into Harvard with a full academic scholarship. My parents had refused to pay for it, said I should go to state school instead. When I'd tried to take the scholarship anyway, my father had called the admissions office and told them I was declining the offer due to personal issues. He'd forged my signature on the decline letter. I'd found out 2 weeks later when I'd called Harvard to ask about orientation dates. They'd been confused, told me I'd withdrawn my application. I'd been devastated, spent a week in bed barely eating. My parents had told Emma I was being dramatic. I'd ended up at state school, working 3 jobs to pay for it because my parents said they'd used up my college fund on family expenses. Emma had lived at home rent-free during college, with my parents paying for everything. I'd lived in a converted garage off campus with 2 other roommates and survived on ramen and whatever food I could steal from the dining hall. After college, I'd gotten the job at Sterling Tech through sheer determination and talent. My father had been furious, but the hiring had been done by someone in HR who didn't know I was the CEO's daughter. I'd applied under my full legal name, Victoria Adelaide Sterling, and gone by Victoria Adelaide during the interview process. By the time they'd discovered the connection, I'd already been hired and it would have looked suspicious to fire me. My father had made my life at the company miserable in subtle ways, assigning me to projects that were designed to fail, excluding me from important meetings, making sure I was never given opportunities to showcase my skills. I'd worked twice as hard as everyone else for half the recognition. And through it all, I'd kept trying to earn their love, kept trying to be good enough, smart enough, quiet enough. I'd attended every family event, swallowed every insult, smiled through every humiliation. Because I'd thought that eventually, someday, they'd see me as their daughter instead of a burden. The end had come on my 28th birthday. Emma was getting married to Christopher, her second marriage, actually. After the first one had ended in a quiet annulment when she was 23, her first husband had discovered her cheating within 6 months. The wedding was scheduled for the same day as my birthday. When I'd mentioned this to Mother, she'd laughed and said, "Well, Victoria, it's not like you had plans anyway." I'd been driving home from work that night, tired and sad and so desperately lonely I could barely breathe. The road had been wet from rain. Emma had been texting me, long, rambling messages about how I needed to be at the rehearsal dinner the next day, how I needed to help her with last-minute preparations, how I was being selfish by even mentioning my birthday. I'd been reading her texts at a stoplight when the light turned green. I'd pressed the accelerator, still looking at my phone, and hadn't seen the truck running the red light until it was too late. The last thing I'd seen was Emma's text on my phone screen. "I don't know why you're being so difficult. You've never been important. At least try to be useful." Then nothing. Then everything. Then I was 18 again, standing in my childhood bedroom with a decade of memories and a second chance. The turning point came exactly 3 weeks after the closet incident. I'd endured 3 weeks of silent treatment from my parents, angry texts from Emma, and a passive-aggressive voicemail from my mother's sister, Aunt Caroline, about family responsibility and supporting your sister during this important time. I'd ignored all of it and focused on my plan. Because here's what my family didn't know. I'd spent 10 years working in data analysis at Sterling Tech in my previous life. I'd been good at it too. Good enough that after my death, they'd had to hire 3 people to replace me. And during those 10 years, I'd learned things, important things, things about my father's company, about the financial decisions he'd made, about the corners he'd cut and the rules he'd bent. In my previous life, I'd never done anything with that information. I'd been too afraid of retribution, too desperate to maintain the tiny connection to my family that I had. But this time I had nothing to lose. I was sitting at my desk at Sterling Tech, the same cramped cubicle in the basement that I'd had in my previous life, when I started digging. The company's internal network security was laughable if you knew where to look. I'd learned that in my late 20s, after I'd accidentally stumbled onto files I shouldn't have seen. This time, I knew exactly what I was looking for. My father's first fortune had been legitimate. The cloud computing company he'd sold for $30 million had been revolutionary for its time. But the second fortune, the one that had really established the Sterling family as wealthy rather than just comfortable, that had been built on theft. In 2019, a small startup called Nexus Solutions had developed a proprietary algorithm for optimizing data center efficiency. It was brilliant, cutting energy costs by up to 40% while improving processing speed. The startup had been run by 2 MIT graduates, Marcus Chen and Aisha Patel, who'd been pitching to venture capital firms for Series A funding. My father had been one of the VCs they'd pitched to. He'd passed on the investment, said the technology wasn't mature enough. 3 months later, Sterling Tech had announced a revolutionary new efficiency algorithm that was remarkably similar to Nexus Solutions' work. Marcus and Aisha had sued. It should have been an open and shut case. They had patents, documentation, timestamps proving they'd developed the technology first. But my father had done 2 things. First, he'd hired the most expensive lawyers money could buy. Second, he'd paid off one of Nexus Solutions' employees, a junior developer named Tom Whitfield, to testify that the technology had actually been his side project and that he'd brought it to my father before Nexus Solutions had filed their patents. The lawsuit had dragged on for 3 years. By the end, Marcus and Aisha had run out of money for legal fees. They'd been forced to settle for a fraction of what they deserved, and their company had gone bankrupt. Tom Whitfield had disappeared with his payout, and Sterling Tech had made billions from the stolen algorithm. I'd learned all this in my previous life by accident, stumbling onto files my father had thought were secured. He'd kept everything: call records, payment receipts, emails between him and Tom Whitfield. Why? Because powerful men are arrogant. They keep trophies of their victories, even the illegal ones. I spent 2 weeks copying everything, every file, every email, every piece of evidence. I documented the payoff to Tom Whitfield, 2.3 million wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, traced through 3 shell corporations but ultimately traceable with enough patience. I documented the coaching sessions between my father's lawyers and Tom, the fabricated timeline they'd constructed, the truth they'd buried. And then I documented everything else I found while I was digging. The tax fraud, creative accounting that had saved Sterling Tech tens of millions in corporate taxes through illegal offshore schemes. The insider trading, stock purchases made by my mother through a shell corporation days before major Sterling Tech announcements. The EPA violations at Sterling Tech's manufacturing facilities that my father had covered up by paying off inspectors. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to destroy my father's company, his reputation, and his freedom. The question was, what was I going to do with it? The answer came to me during Emma's engagement party, the one I'd refused to attend. I wasn't there physically, but I'd set up a little surprise that made my absence irrelevant. You see, my family had made one critical mistake in their treatment of me. They'd underestimated my intelligence so thoroughly that they'd never thought to monitor what I was doing. I'd had access to the family's shared cloud storage for years, the one where Mother kept all her social files, including the complete guest list for Emma's engagement party. 300 people. 300 of the wealthiest, most influential people in Connecticut and New York. People who cared deeply about appearances, about reputation, about being associated with success rather than scandal. I'd created a simple website. Nothing fancy, just a clean, professional layout with a single page of information. At the top, the truth about James Sterling. Below that, a curated selection of the evidence I'd compiled, presented in a way that even a layperson could understand. Bank records, emails, testimony, photos of the paperwork my father had used to steal Nexus Solutions' algorithm. At the bottom of the page, this information has been submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The original developers of the stolen technology, Marcus Chen and Aisha Patel, have been contacted and provided with all evidence necessary to reopen their case. I'd set up the website to go live at exactly 8 p.m., right in the middle of Emma's engagement party, during the champagne toast. And I'd sent the link to every single person on the guest list, timed to arrive on their phones at the same moment. I imagined the scene. Emma in her designer dress, a new one, since I'd donated the one she'd wanted, standing next to Christopher Hartford with his fake smile and wandering eyes. My father giving a speech about family and love and partnership. My mother beaming with pride. 3 glasses of champagne deep and holding court with the other society wives. And then 300 phones buzzing simultaneously. 300 of the most important people in my parents' social circle opening a text from an unknown number. You deserve to know the truth about the people you're celebrating with tonight. The man giving the toast built his fortune on theft and fraud. Here's the proof. I was home in my little room when it happened, tracking the website analytics on my laptop. The spike in traffic at 8:02 p.m. was beautiful. 300 visitors in the span of 3 minutes. Average time on page, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. More than enough time to read the key points and see the evidence. My phone started ringing at 8:11 p.m. Father. I didn't answer. It rang again. Mother. I let it go to voicemail. Emma texted, "What did you do?" Followed by a stream of increasingly hysterical messages. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd bought with my own money, and waited. The call I was actually waiting for came at 9:47 p.m. Marcus Chen, the co-founder of Nexus Solutions, whose contact information I'd found through LinkedIn and who I'd sent a detailed email to 3 days earlier. Victoria Sterling. His voice was cautious, hopeful, afraid to hope too much. Mr. Chen, I said warmly, I'm so glad you called. Is this real? The evidence you sent me, the website? Is it legitimate? Every word, every document. I've spent the past 3 weeks compiling it all, and I've already submitted everything to the relevant authorities. But I wanted you to have it too, because you deserve a chance to reopen your case with this new evidence. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Why? Why are you doing this? I thought about the question. The simple answer was revenge, pure, justified, righteous revenge. But it was more than that. Because it's the truth, I said finally, Bun. Because you deserved better than what happened to you. Because my father is a thief and a fraud, and he's gotten away with it for too long. And because I paused, surprised by the emotion in my own voice. Because I know what it's like to have everything stolen from you by someone who thinks they can get away with it just because they have money and power. Thank you, Marcus said, and I could hear that he was crying. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. Aisha and I, we lost everything. Our company, our savings, our reputation. I'm working as a data analyst now. She's teaching community college computer science classes. We had to start over from nothing because your father stole our life's work. Not anymore, I said firmly. I've also taken the liberty of contacting several tech journalists who specialize in corporate fraud. They'll be reaching out to you tomorrow. This is going to be a major story, Mr. Chen, and this time you're going to win. After we hung up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, but only a moment, because the real work was just beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. Don't make me come find you. Father, texting from someone else's phone since I'd blocked his number. I typed back, I don't work tomorrow, and I think you'll be too busy dealing with the FBI to worry about me. Then I blocked that number too. The next 3 weeks were glorious chaos. I watched from the outside as my father's empire crumbled, and I felt no guilt whatsoever. The SEC launched a formal investigation within 48 hours. The IRS followed 2 days later. The FBI took a bit longer. Federal bureaucracy moves slowly. But by day 10, agents were raiding Sterling Tech's headquarters and my parents' home, seizing computers and files. The media coverage was relentless. Tech CEO accused of massive fraud. The stolen algorithm, how James Sterling built his fortune on theft. Society family's dark secret exposed at engagement party. The New York Times ran a front-page story. The Wall Street Journal did a deep dive into Sterling Tech's finances. TechCrunch published the emails between my father and Tom Whitfield with the headline, Receipts, the smoking gun in Sterling Tech scandal. My mother's society friends abandoned her immediately. Invitations were rescinded. The family was dropped from charity boards. Aunt Caroline, who'd left me that passive-aggressive voicemail about family responsibility, publicly denounced my parents in a statement to the press, claiming she'd never truly approved of my father and had always had concerns about his business practices. Emma's engagement party became the most talked about social event of the year, but not in the way she'd hoped. The hashtag #Sterling Scandal trended on Twitter for 3 days. Someone had filmed the moment when everyone's phones buzzed simultaneously, captured Emma's face as she realized something was wrong, recorded my father's confusion turning to panic as he checked his own phone. Christopher Hartford broke off the engagement within a week. His family couldn't be associated with the scandal. Emma was devastated, but I knew the truth. I'd saved her from a marriage that would have made her miserable anyway. She'd never thank me for it, but it was better this way. The best part came 2 weeks after the party. Marcus Chen and Aisha Patel, armed with my evidence and funded by a legal firm that smelled blood in the water and was working on contingency, filed a new lawsuit against Sterling Tech. This time, they weren't asking for a settlement. They were asking for ownership of the algorithm, compensation for 15 years of lost profits, and punitive damages. The case was airtight. My father's lawyers, the expensive ones who'd helped him win the first time, quietly advised him to settle. He refused, too arrogant to admit defeat. Big mistake. The trial was a bloodbath. Marcus and Aisha's lawyers presented my evidence piece by piece, building an unassailable case. Tom Whitfield, the employee my father had paid off, was tracked down in the Cayman Islands and subpoenaed. Faced with potential criminal charges for his role in the fraud, he flipped immediately, confirming everything. The judge was not amused. Sterling Tech was ordered to pay $847 million in damages, 15 years of lost profits plus punitive damages calculated to hurt. The algorithm patent was transferred to Marcus and Aisha, and my father was referred to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. But I wasn't done yet. Because while my father's professional life was crumbling, I was working on something even more personal. You see, our family home, the sprawling Connecticut estate with 12 bedrooms and a pool house and gardens that required a staff of 4 to maintain, wasn't actually owned by my parents. It was owned by a family trust established by my mother's grandfather in 1947. And according to the trust documents, which I'd obtained through some creative research at the county records office, the house was supposed to be inherited equally by all direct descendants of the original trustee. Equally meant Emma and I should each own 50% of the house. But my mother, as the trustee, had been planning to will the entire property to Emma. I'd found the draft will in my previous life, after Mother's death, and learned that I'd been completely written out of the trust inheritance. That wasn't legal. Trust documents supersede wills, and the original trust was very clear about equal distribution among descendants. I hired a lawyer, a very good one, paid for with the money I'd saved from my 3 jobs in my previous life that I'd stashed in accounts my family didn't know about. We filed a petition with the probate court arguing that my mother had breached her fiduciary duty as trustee and that she should be removed from that position. The timing was perfect. My parents were already drowning in legal bills from the Sterling Tech scandal. My mother's society friends had abandoned her, and now her own daughter was suing her for control of the family home. The judge sided with me. My mother was removed as trustee and replaced with a neutral third party. The house was appraised at $8.4 million, and I was awarded my 50% share. But I didn't want to co-own a house with Emma, so I forced a sale. Emma was hysterical. "You can't do this. This is our family home. Where am I supposed to live?" "I don't know, Emma," I said coolly during the one conversation we had about it, conducted through lawyers in a conference room that cost $800 an hour to rent. "Maybe you could get a job and rent an apartment like the rest of us." "I can't get a job. I have a degree in art history. No one is hiring." "Then I guess you should have studied something practical," I replied, echoing the exact words my mother had said to me when I'd wanted to minor in creative writing in college. Mother had insisted I focus on something useful instead, hence my data analysis degree. The irony was delicious. The house sold within 3 months, bought by a hedge fund manager who wanted a Connecticut estate for weekend entertaining. I walked away with $4.2 million after legal fees and taxes. Emma got the same amount, but she'd already spent most of it within 6 months on trying to maintain her lifestyle, while her engagement was broken off and her social standing collapsed. I, on the other hand, had plans for my money. The climax of my revenge came during my father's criminal trial, 8 months after Emma's disastrous engagement party. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution had built their case on my evidence, and they were thorough. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the public gallery where my father could see me. At first, he tried to ignore me. Then he tried to stare me down using that intimidation tactic that had worked so well on me in my previous life. But I simply smiled at him, not with warmth, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching justice finally being served. My mother and Emma sat on the other side of the courtroom, both looking diminished. Mother had aged 10 years and 8 months. Her Botox had worn off. She couldn't afford to maintain it anymore, not with their assets frozen and legal bills mounting into the millions. Emma had gained weight, stress eating her way through the scandal. Her Instagram, once full of carefully curated photos of her perfect life, had been made private after the harassment from internet vigilantes got too intense. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Emma, but only a twinge. She'd made her choices. She'd built her identity on being better than me, on taking what was mine, on treating me like I was less than human. The consequences of those choices weren't my responsibility. The prosecution's star witness was Tom Whitfield, the employee my father had paid off. He was testifying in exchange for a reduced sentence, 5 years probation instead of 20 years in prison. He took the stand looking nervous but determined, and proceeded to detail exactly how my father had orchestrated the theft of Nexus Solutions' algorithm. Mr. Sterling called me into his office in March of 2019, Tom testified. He showed me the Nexus Solutions pitch deck and asked if I could replicate their algorithm. I told him I could, but it would take time and they'd clearly developed it first. He said that didn't matter. He said we'd make it look like I'd developed it independently, bring me on as a consultant, and backdate some documents. And you agreed to this? The prosecutor asked. I was young and stupid, and he offered me $2.3 million, Tom said bluntly. He also said that if I didn't help him, he'd make sure I never worked in tech again. Mr. Sterling was very clear that he always got what he wanted, one way or another. I watched my father's face as Tom spoke. He was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the rage building. His lawyers had advised him not to testify. Anything he said could only hurt him. But I knew he was dying to defend himself, to spin this somehow. The next witness was Marcus Chen. He was more composed than Tom, but the emotion in his voice was unmistakable as he described what my father's theft had cost him. We'd spent 4 years developing that algorithm, Marcus said. Aisha and I met at MIT, became friends, realized we both had this vision for making data centers more efficient. We worked nights and weekends while holding down full-time jobs to save money to start the company. When we finally launched Nexus Solutions, it was everything we'd dreamed of. And then James Sterling stole it all. Can you describe the impact this had on your life? The prosecutor asked gently. Marcus's jaw tightened. We lost everything. Our company went bankrupt from the legal fees. We both had to declare personal bankruptcy too because we'd taken out loans to fund the lawsuit. Aisha's marriage fell apart from the stress. Her husband left her because they lost their house, their savings, everything. I developed severe anxiety and depression. I was suicidal for a while. He looked directly at my father. James Sterling didn't just steal our algorithm, he stole our future, our dreams, our financial security, and our mental health. And he did it without a second thought because people like us didn't matter to him. We were just obstacles to be crushed. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. Then it was Aisha's turn. She was smaller than I'd expected, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. But her voice was steel. I want to be clear about something, she said, looking at the jury. Marcus and I weren't naive. We knew that tech was a competitive industry. We knew that sometimes people would try to copy our work. What we didn't expect was that someone would actively steal our work, destroy our company, and then use expensive lawyers to gaslight us into thinking we were the problem. She pulled out a piece of paper. This is an email James Sterling sent to one of his lawyers during our first lawsuit. It was in the evidence provided by his daughter, Victoria. She looked at me briefly, and I saw gratitude in her eyes. The email says, and I quote, "These people are nobody. They have no money, no connections, no power. We just need to drag this out until they can't afford to fight anymore. Justice is for people who can pay for it." The jury members shifted uncomfortably. One woman looked disgusted. A man in the back row shook his head. That's who James Sterling is, Aisha continued. Someone who believes that justice is for sale, that he can destroy people's lives without consequences because he's rich and we're not. Well, Mr. Sterling, you were wrong. Justice isn't for sale. It just took longer than it should have. The prosecution rested their case 2 days later. My father's lawyers put up a weak defense, trying to argue that Tom Whitfield was lying, that the evidence was circumstantial, that my father had been misled by subordinates. None of it was convincing. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. My father's face went white. My mother gasped. Emma started crying. And I sat in the gallery, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what I'd accomplished. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. During that hearing, she was withering in her assessment. "Mr. Sterling, you are a thief and a bully," she said, looking at him over her glasses. "You stole intellectual property from 2 talented young people who had done everything right, worked hard, played by the rules, believed in the system, and you crushed them because you could. You used your wealth and power to pervert justice, to intimidate witnesses, to destroy lives. The only reason we're here today is because your own daughter had the courage to expose you." She looked at me then and nodded slightly. Ms. Sterling's actions demonstrate the kind of moral courage her father clearly lacks. She sacrificed her relationship with her family to do what was right. That takes extraordinary strength. My father's lawyers had asked for a minimum sentence, citing his age, 56, his contributions to the tech industry, and his lack of prior criminal history. The prosecution asked for the maximum, 20 years. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Additionally, she ordered him to pay full restitution to Marcus and Aisha, a separate $127 million on top of the civil judgment, and levied the maximum fine of $5 million. Sterling Tech, already crippled by the lawsuit and the scandal, declared bankruptcy within a month. The algorithm patent that the company had been built on now belonged to Marcus and Aisha, and without it, Sterling Tech had no real value. The company was liquidated, its assets sold off, and its employees, including me technically, were let go. But I'd expected that. I'd already made other plans. The epilogue to my revenge played out over the next 2 years, and it was everything I dreamed of. Marcus Chen and Aisha Patel used their reclaimed algorithm to launch a new company, Nexus 2.0. They raised $50 million and Series A funding within 3 months. Investors were eager to support the victims of the Sterling scandal, who'd finally gotten justice. The company specialized in sustainable data center solutions, and within 18 months, they'd secured contracts with Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. They hired me as their chief data officer. "You gave us back our future," Marcus had said during my interview, which was more of a formality than an actual interview. "The least we can do is give you a chance to build yours without your father's shadow hanging over you." My salary was $350,000 a year, plus equity. I had a team of 12 brilliant people, an unlimited research budget, and the freedom to innovate without someone actively sabotaging me. For the first time in my life, either version of it, I was valued for my skills rather than tolerated despite my existence. I bought a beautiful apartment in Brooklyn, a 2-bedroom with exposed brick and huge windows that let in morning light. I furnished it myself, choosing every piece carefully. No hand-me-downs from Emma, no furniture selected by my mother. Every item was mine, chosen by me, reflecting my taste. I made friends, real friends, people who liked me for who I was rather than what my last name could do for them. I dated, though nothing serious yet. I was learning how to be a person rather than a target of abuse, and that took time. I started therapy. A good therapist, someone who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just difficult family dynamics or normal sibling rivalry. It was systematic emotional and financial abuse designed to break me down and keep me subordinate. "You didn't just survive," my therapist told me during one session. "You escaped. And then you made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else the same way." That's remarkable, Victoria. My mother tried to contact me exactly once, 6 months after my father's sentencing. She'd sent a letter to my workplace. She didn't have my new address, written on fancy stationery that she probably couldn't afford anymore. "Dearest Victoria, I know things have been difficult between us, but you're still my daughter. I hope we can move past this unfortunate situation and rebuild our relationship. Your sister misses you terribly, and I think it would be good for all of us to have a family, dinner and talk things through. I'm sure you didn't intend for things to go this far with your father. If you would consider speaking to the prosecutors about reducing his sentence, I'm sure they would listen to you. It's not too late to fix this. With love, Mother." I read it once, felt absolutely nothing, and shredded it. Then I blocked her email and had my assistant screen my mail for anything from her or Emma. Emma tried harder and more frequently to reach out. She'd burned through most of her money from the house sale. $4.2 million sounds like a lot until you're trying to maintain a lifestyle that requires that much annually. She'd sent me emails, texts from new numbers, even showed up at my office once. I'd had security escort her out. The last message I got from her was a year after my father's trial. She'd sent it from a new Instagram account, a long, rambling direct message about how I'd destroyed the family, how I was cruel and vindictive, how I'd always been jealous of her. The message ended with, "I hope you're happy now. You got what you wanted. You ruined all of our lives. Was it worth it?" I thought about that question seriously before I responded. Was it worth it? I thought about my life before, the decade of grinding poverty and emotional abuse, working myself to death for people who saw me as a burden. The loneliness, the constant second guessing of my own worth, the death in a hospital room, alone, unmourned. I thought about my life now, the career I loved, the apartment that was mine, the friends who actually cared about me, the therapy that was helping me heal. The knowledge that Marcus and Aisha had their lives back, that my father couldn't hurt anyone else, that justice had finally been served. I typed back, yes, it was worth every second. Then I blocked that account too. 2 years after my father's sentencing, I attended a tech industry gala where Nexus 2.0 was receiving an award for innovation and sustainable business practices. Marcus and Aisha were on stage, giving an acceptance speech about second chances and the importance of fighting for what's right, even when it seems hopeless. "We want to thank someone who couldn't be here tonight," Marcus said, and I froze because I was there, sitting at a table in the back. Then I realized he was talking about his wife, who was home with their new baby. But Aisha continued, "We also want to thank Victoria Sterling, our CDO, who gave us the evidence we needed to fight back and who has been instrumental in building Nexus 2.0 into what it is today." "Victoria, where are you? Stand up." The spotlight found me. I stood reluctantly as the room broke into applause. Some of these people knew my story. Most didn't, but they were applauding anyway. And for the first time in my life, I was being recognized for something good I'd done, rather than being invisible or scorned. Marcus continued, "Victoria taught us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding people who value you, support you, and believe in you. She's family to us now, and we're grateful every day that she had the courage to do what was right." I sat down, blinking back tears. Found family. That's what this was. These people, this company, this life I'd built, they were my real family. The one that mattered. My father would be in prison until he was 66. My mother had taken a job as a lifestyle consultant for a minor social media influencer, a humiliating fall from her days of presiding over charity galas. Emma was working retail at a boutique in Greenwich, her dreams of being a society wife thoroughly destroyed. And me, I was thriving. 3 months ago, I'd received a letter from Marcus Chen. Inside was a check for $2 million, a bonus, he said, for my instrumental role in Nexus 2.0's success. But there was also a note. "Victoria, this is your share of what we recovered from the Sterling Tech bankruptcy. We insisted during the settlement that part of the restitution be set aside for you, separate from what we received. You were a victim of your father's crimes too, just in a different way. This is your justice. Thank you for giving us back our lives. We hope this helps you build yours. With gratitude and friendship, Marcus and Aisha." I'd cried reading that letter. Real tears, the kind that come from being seen and valued and appreciated for the first time. I used part of the money to establish a scholarship fund at my old state university for students who were paying their own way through school without family support. I called it the Victoria Adelaide Foundation. The first scholarship went to a girl whose story sounded remarkably like mine. Estranged from her family, working 3 jobs, studying data science, determined to make something of herself despite every obstacle. The rest of the money I invested wisely. I was building my own fortune now, one based on my own work and my own ethics. Not stolen, not built on cruelty. Mine. Last month, I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech conference. The topic was overcoming adversity in the technology industry. I almost declined. I still wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight, but Marcus convinced me. "Your story matters," he said. "There are other people out there dealing with family abuse, with being underestimated, with feeling like they'll never escape. They need to hear that it's possible." So I accepted. And on a Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco, I stood on a stage in front of 300 women and told my story. Not all of it, that would have taken hours, but the key points: the abuse, the death, the rebirth, the revenge, the redemption. "I'm not going to tell you that revenge is always the answer," I said near the end of my speech. "But I will tell you this. When someone is actively harming you, when they're stealing from you, when they're destroying your future, you have the right to fight back. You have the right to expose the truth. You have the right to protect yourself and others from abusers. I paused, looking out at the audience. Some women were nodding, some were crying. One woman in the front row was typing frantically on her phone, probably taking notes. My family taught me that I was worthless, that I didn't matter, that my only value was in how I could serve them. It took dying and being given a second chance to learn the truth. I was never the problem. They were. And once I accepted that, once I stopped trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, I was free. The standing ovation was unexpected and overwhelming. Women lined up afterward to talk to me, to share their own stories of family abuse and professional sabotage. I stayed for 3 hours, listening and offering what advice I could, giving out my email address to those who wanted to stay in touch. One woman, probably in her early 20s, waited until everyone else had left. "I'm living your before," she said quietly. "My family treats me the way yours treated you. I'm the scapegoat, the black sheep. And I keep trying to prove myself to them, keep thinking that maybe if I just work hard enough or achieve enough, they'll finally love me." I recognized myself in her words, in the desperate hope in her eyes. I took her hand on a. "They won't," I said gently. "People like that aren't capable of that kind of love. They need someone to blame, someone to look down on, someone to make them feel superior. You could cure cancer and they'd find a way to criticize you for not doing it fast enough. The question isn't how do you make them love you? The question is, when are you going to start loving yourself enough to walk away?" She started crying. I hugged her, this stranger who was me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a lifetime ago. And I gave her my card, my real contact information, not just a generic email. "If you need help getting out," I said, "call me. I mean it. Resources, advice, just someone who understands. I'm here." She clutched the card like it was a life raft. Maybe it was. Today is my 30th birthday. In my previous life, I died today, or rather, yesterday, since the accident happened the night before my birthday, and I died just after midnight. In this life, I'm celebrating at a restaurant in Manhattan with Marcus, Aisha, and a dozen other friends I've made over the past 2 years. We're drinking expensive wine and eating incredible food, and everyone is laughing and happy. Aisha's baby is there, sleeping peacefully in a carrier despite the noise. Marcus's boyfriend is telling a hilarious story about their recent vacation disaster. My friend Jennifer, from the apartment down the hall, is flirting with one of my coworkers. This is what life is supposed to be like, I realize. This is what I was missing in my previous life. Not the material things, though those are nice, but this sense of belonging, of being valued, of being celebrated just for existing. My phone buzzes during dessert, an unknown number. I almost ignore it, but something makes me check. It's a text from Emma. "Happy birthday. I know you won't respond, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did to you, I'm in therapy. I'm trying to be better. I'm sorry. You were right about everything." I stare at the message for a long moment. Part of me wants to believe it. The old me, the one who spent years desperate for family acceptance, would have responded immediately, eager to rebuild something from the ruins. But I'm not that person anymore. I think about responding. I think about what I might say. But in the end, I simply delete the message and turn my phone face down on the table. Maybe Emma is genuinely sorry. Maybe she's learned something. Maybe she'll become a better person. But that's not my problem anymore. I don't owe her forgiveness. I don't owe her a relationship. I don't owe her anything. I owe myself peace, happiness, and the life I've built brick by brick from the ashes of the one they tried to burn down. "Everything okay?" Marcus asks, noticing my momentary distraction. "Everything's perfect," I say, and I mean it. The waiter brings out a birthday cake. Chocolate, my favorite, which someone actually remembered because these people actually care about me. Everyone sings happy birthday, slightly off-key and enthusiastic. I blow out the candles and make a wish. In my previous life, I would have wished for my family to love me. I would have wished to be good enough, to be worthy, to be seen. This time, I wish for nothing, because I already have everything I need. As I cut the cake and pass out slices, as my friends talk and laugh around me, as the city lights sparkle through the restaurant windows, I think about the girl I used to be, the one who died alone in a hospital room, unloved and unvalued, the one who spent her entire life trying to earn something that was impossible to earn. I wish I could go back and tell her, "You're already enough. You always were. The problem was never you." But I can't go back. None of us can. We can only move forward, making better choices, building better lives, becoming better versions of ourselves. And that's exactly what I've done. My father is in prison. My mother is humiliated and powerless. Emma is facing the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty and entitlement. Marcus and Aisha have their company back and then some. I have a career I love, friends who value me, and a future that's entirely my own. Justice has been served, the villains have been defeated, and I, the underestimated underdog, the dismissed daughter, the overlooked victim, I have won. Not because I got revenge, though I did, not because I'm wealthy now, though I am, not because my abusers suffered, though they have. I've won because I'm finally, genuinely, completely happy. Because I've learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, though that's certainly satisfying. Best revenge is building a life so good, so full, so authentically yours that they become irrelevant. Background noise in the story of your success. My sister took my favorite sweater after Rebirth, but I'd already donated my entire closet because I didn't need those old things anymore. I was building something new, something better, something entirely mine. And that made all the difference. As the evening winds down and we prepare to leave, Aisha catches my arm. "Thank you," she says quietly. "For everything. You changed our lives." "You changed mine too," I reply and hug her. Because that's the thing about justice and revenge and redemption. It's never just about you. When you fight back against abusers, when you expose the truth, when you refuse to be a victim anymore, you don't just save yourself. You save everyone else who might have been their next target. You make the world a little bit safer, a little bit fairer, a little bit better. My family tried to destroy me. Instead, I destroyed the system that allowed them to abuse me. And in doing so, I built something beautiful from the wreckage. I walk out of the restaurant into the warm Manhattan night, surrounded by people who love me, heading toward a future that's bright and unlimited and entirely my own. And I've never been happier in either of my lives. This is victory. This is vindication. This is what it means to finally win.